I want to talk to you today really about research and about the role that research can play in the abolition movement. My presentation today is just going to cover some introductory comments. I want to talk a little bit about what an articulated research plan for abolition can be or could be. And I'm going to make really three arguments about the kinds of arguments that we could make to contribute to abolition from the research perspective. And I don't mean these to be a complete picture, but rather some key ingredients. I'm going to argue for humanistic arguments, for ideological arguments, and for political, economic arguments. And then I will wrap it up with some concluding thoughts. The first thing I would like to start with is just to mention a case study. Maybe that's not going to provide us with definitive data, but sometimes an individual story highlights the importance of something, and I'll use myself as someone who basically found himself at the end of a master's program in American Studies. For the first time, I was in a course on the ethics of civility, and I had this sneaking suspicion, since I had to do a paper for this seminar, that if I examined how people in prison are treated in the United States, that it would probably be different. This was my level of ignorance, despite the fact that I was an educated person considered at this point. And I discovered in the bowels of the library all of this research about the American criminal justice system, and was suddenly confronted with this reality that I found absolutely horrifying. Notice I said that I encountered a body of research. And it was so startling to me that I instantly had this feeling, I have found my life's work. And literally, at the end of that semester, I graduated. I moved to San Francisco, which is a center of activism against the PIC, and became deeply involved in organizing trips to prisons, interviewing hundreds of prisoners, advocating for their medical needs, and all these other problems that, of course, people in prison experience. I then, after doing that for 5 years, I felt that I didn't really understand the issues. I didn't understand the problems. And being mindful that the prison itself was invented by reformers, I became very concerned with myself as a would-be reformer. So I went to a PhD program where I twice again discovered the incredible power of research. The first experience was working for 2 summers at the Sentencing Project in Washington, D.C. And for those of you who are not Americans, maybe don't know about it, the Sentencing Project is probably the premier progressive policy-making and agenda-pushing organization in the country. It's a nonprofit in the U.S. And watching firsthand the power, the influence of good research in terms of public discourse, in terms of influencing political process, in terms of packing activists with information that they can use themselves to do their good work. The second part was that then I saw myself, as I became more and more knowledgeable, that I could use research to be a public educator, to be a public advocate, to be a teacher in the classroom that's more effective, to point my students to go to research to make their own discoveries. So in these ways, I found that research is actually phenomenally important, phenomenally powerful, and important aspect of what was to become, later on, my own eventual progression into an abolitionist. I'm going to launch my discussion of research from a reminder of Senator Webb and his National Criminal Justice Commission Act. Angela mentioned this yesterday in her presentation, and you can have many different kinds of reactions to Webb and his act, but one thing is unmistakably true about this, that what we are used to in the United States from the political side is a rhetoric that many of you are used to from other countries, of get tough on crime, more prisons, harsher penalties, disregard for human rights issues, and just a lack of concern for people and their extended families that are outside, but of course, primarily for those inside as well. And what is different is that you have a senator who is very well thought of, a member of some key conservative background groups, like he's a war veteran, an accomplished journalist who has published books, and who actually, maybe not so coincidentally, has a background in investigating prisons in Japan. If you haven't seen anything about this, you might want to jot down that website and take a look at it. It's a 10-minute YouTube video with Webb sort of talking about what he wants to do. And essentially what he wants to do, I'm just taking some quick notes here because I don't have time to show it to you. This is what he says. Realize how radical this is for American rhetoric. And radical because essentially it's out of the Judiciary Committee in Congress now, and it's going to get voted on and more than likely passed. So it's very broadly supported. This is the things he says. In America, our incarceration rate is extreme. We have 5% of the world population and 25% of the world's prisoners. We have extreme racial and gender disparities. This is where we put the mentally ill in our community. There are 4 times more mentally ill people in prison than in mental institutions. Mandatory sentencing is not working. The war on drugs has been a disaster. We went from 40,000 to 500,000 in prison in 20 years, and it's more of a problem than it ever has been. The public thinks crime is up, and their perception of safety is down. What we're doing is not working, in other words. We are locking up way too much. We are not protecting civil rights and liberties of people coming into contact with the system. We are simplifying complicated problems, such as gangs. We are not addressing victims. He speaks about how he has talked to Supreme Court justices, prosecutors, defense lawyers, judges, former offenders, people in prison, and everybody say to him, quote, a different type of approach is needed. He speaks about all the organizations across the philosophical and political spectrum that are behind his act. The Sentencing Project, the American Civil Liberties Union, the Fraternal Order of Police, the NAACP, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, American Parole and Probation Association, the Cato Institute, the American Correctional Association, National District Attorney Association, Prison Fellowship, and more. So groups from the left, from the right, conservative think tanks, progressive think tanks, people working in the system, people advocating against the system, etc. He is standing up and saying everybody is agreed. So we come now to what we might say are questions. That the presence of this act, which by the way, to remind you, as Angela said yesterday, is about saying we need to study the problem of the criminal justice system because it's not working. You know, we need to find out what's going on. As if all of this research has, been in existence for decades, but you have to forgive Washington, this is the way it works. Right? When they see a problem, now they are going to investigate. They're going to come out with the truth. Everybody else is kind of biased and has their agenda, but they're really going to be straight about it. So, we could come out at different points, regarding Webb and his act. Is all this going to mount up to being just the same old reclamation of, the property of the carceral, or is it going to end up being a genuine dialogue? Is this the center moving to the left? Really? Is this really finally happening? Or is this just more and more of the same old Washington bullshit? Unknown right now. As a researcher, I'm not going to play into prophecy. But what I will tell you is this. This demonstrates that from the last quarter from which I expected it anyway to see, which is the political level, there is a conversation that is public, that is publicly being embraced by politicians who in America are absolutely terrified of coming on as soft on crime, regarding radical problems, regarding the fact that we do indeed need to change how we're doing things. And the way it's languaged is not about prison abolition. Of course. It's not about abolition at all. But it is about a systematic problem across the board. It involves the courts, it involves the prisons, it involves the way we think about law, it involves everything. And as such, from our perspective, it highlights how abolition is not about abolition of prisons, but it's really abolition of the ways that the criminal justice system thinks and acts. So, the question now comes, is the scholarship of abolition ready to engage with this act? Well, I would say not. I was talking to Hal yesterday. I asked him this question, what he thought about the research field in the academic community, and I loved what he said, and I couldn't agree more. His reply was, it's dead. Another way of saying it is, it's not really in existence. We have some phenomenally distinguished, some incredible scholars who for decades have talked about this, have made arguments, but we do not have an abolition plan. We do not have a field of research in existence. It is really fundamentally not there. Proportionately, as I say it here, few scholars in this academic community are concerned with this. And I'm talking about sociologists, criminologists. I go to the ASC conference every year, which is the American Society for Criminology. Of criminology. Thank you, everybody. And you know, the packet of the sessions is usually about this thick. It's usually about this big. And maybe you'll find the word abolition in there once or twice. Maybe. Some years not even at all. And this is just a listing of sessions and of papers. Now, of course, the question is, does such research scarcity matter? I mean, does research in this movement actually matter? I mean, is this something we should care about? I mean, as a scholar activist, is this something I should pay any notice to? Should I just go ahead and teach my classes and do whatever I need to do research-wise to sort of get tenure and move on? Or is this something that I should be actively working towards as somebody who has these passions? As I mentioned to you earlier in my opening, the answer to that question, I think, is very clearly, yes, it does matter. It matters profoundly because of how it takes people from a place of not caring to being passionate abolitionists like myself. It takes somebody, it educates student bodies. It educates the public. It influences public policy, and it is a source of empowerment and a tool for activists themselves. I'm going to sort of run through here now. These three lines of arguments that I'm going to propose are key ingredients, not the only ones by any stretch, nor am I covering these thoroughly in my presentation. But before I even get into that, I want to make 2 points. Okay. First of all, it's absolutely critical that these arguments be made from an abolitionist logic, not from a reformist logic. The reformist logic exists out there. There is more research out there than you can throw a stick at and what the problems with prisons are, and what the problems with courts are, and what the problems with law are. We need research that connects these issues to abolition. And one very important way, as I think about it, is to draw these arguments in a very deeply historical manner. You want to talk about the problem of law in society today? Talk about it historically. Look, this is how law has been used in the criminal justice system. It fundamentally hasn't changed. It has always targeted minorities. It has always targeted the poor. It has always targeted the uneducated. You want to talk about prisons? Same issues. Look at them historically. Who has it targeted? Things haven't changed, really, very much at all. So we can very much powerfully use the historical argument.